We live in a time now where people are emboldened to say, today I feel part female and part male. All right? So today, in fact, I will be neutral to you. I will be androgynous. But you know something? If you're trained in this, you got to be A or B, you got to be a boy, you got to be a girl, you know what you're doing? You're taking your inability of your human mind. By the way, this is true for all human minds, because we got to categorize. We always have to categorize, all right? It makes it easier to think about it, but in the end, it's just lazy, all right? So you say, boy or girl, are you a boy or a girl? And then someone is androgynous, and it makes you feel uncomfortable. But just because you feel uncomfortable, does that give you the right to come back to a person who's expressing their freedom of self?
It doesn't, but I think what I would say, right, but what I would say to this, here's where it gets more complicated. Take the issue of transgender athletes in women's sport, for example.
Okay, I got two more sentences and I'll jump right into that.
Okay.
I just want to set the table here.
Yeah.
I'm setting the table where, that if we allow gender to appear on a spectrum, gender expression to appear on a spectrum, as is apparently the case in the real world where people have the freedom to do so, then for you to put your limited capacity to think on a spectrum in a law that inhibits the freedom of others, that's not a free country. Okay, so now take it to the next step. Where do you want to take that?
Well, what I want to take it to is I don't disagree with that. I think in a free country, you should be allowed to identify whatever the hell you want to identify as. It's fine. I've got no problem with that.
Okay, so now where are you taking it?
So where I'm taking it specifically to say the issue of transgender athletes in women's sport, which I think has, in an attempt to provide fairness and equality for trans athletes, in women's sport, it doesn't apply the other way in men's sport. In women's sport, it's created a new inequality and unfairness where you have trans women born with superior, powerful male biological bodies who are beginning to beat women with comfortable ease in many sports, and yet they were very unsuccessful comparatively when they competed against other biological males as they were before they transitioned. So my question, I guess, there is, isn't that a clear case where science has to be the determining factor? Because if you remove that from this equation, then you end up with gender-neutral Olympics and women don't ever win an Olympic medal again.
Well, there are certain events that the men, like the uneven bars, you won't find men on the uneven bars. It doesn't work with male physiology on that one. Okay.
But my point being, there are reasons why we divide the sexes in sport, is my point. And the moment you start allowing gender identity to overcome biology, I see there's a problem. Okay.
So all that means is we are on a frontier that has not been previously breached, which is, what do you do in a sport where now there's an inherent advantage or disadvantage based on the rules that existed for that sport, whereas previously those advantages or disadvantages didn't exist. So this is not complicated. In high school, in college, and a little bit of graduate school, I wrestled. Okay, I was captain of my high school wrestling team and undefeated. I weighed in high school 190 pounds. Do I wrestle the 125 pounder? No, that would be unfair because I'm 65 pounds heavier, twice as strong, and maybe even faster. So they set up a rule. I only wrestle people my weight. Wrestling has 10 weight categories to make it an interesting contest. Okay, so let me just make this up now, just as a starter point. The transgenderism usually involves hormone readjustments, okay? Testosterone, estrogen. And so we can imagine a future of sports where you're not contesting men against women, you're contesting people in certain brackets of hormone levels. And why not?
Because it doesn't work.
From separating wrestlers into 10?
I hesitate to lecture you about science, Professor Neil deGrasse Tyson. I really do. But I tell you why not, because what they've already tried to do this. They've already tried to reduce hormone levels. What it doesn't do, that process, is reduce body mass or strength, which comes from the male biology.
Right. If you went through puberty as a male,
yes,
and then transitioned afterwards, right, then you'll have a bigger, typically bigger, stronger body.
And that's where I just think it's unfair. Look, I don't have a transphobic bone in my body.
Let's get there. I'm getting there.
I want fairness and equality for trans athletes, but there's a big but here, I think.
I'm working my way up to that. So one possibility, like I said, I'm just making this up on the fly, is you have hormone categories. If that does not solve the problem, or to the extent that it doesn't, then you put in other rules that separate who's competing with whom. Like I said, we do this all the time.
Right.
All right? And by the way, are you going to go to Michael Phelps and say, you're genetically taller, and we have a floppier, I don't know if all of this is true, but some of it is true, you have floppier ankles and webbed fingers, and so we're not going to compete you in this race because you'll have an advantage that other people don't.